Welcome to the file no one can close. The one they tried to bury, erase, deny, redact. And still, it spreads. You're not supposed to be here. That's the whisper on encrypted lines, among those who deal in secrets too sensitive for governments, too ancient for religions. You arrived without fanfare, without lineage, without explanation. And within weeks, patterns shifted. Unpredictable outcomes started folding in around your steps. People once untouchable began to fall apart. And the strangest thing? There's no paper trail, no schooling, no grooming, no connections, just emergence. You surfaced like a ripple on a still lake, then turned the water black. They've pulled every surveillance angle, reviewed every social string, and still no origin point. A name without history. A face that doesn't map to records. You became a case study in disruption, not because you were loud, not because you asked for attention, but because every place you entered stopped functioning the same way once you left. Some called it influence, others called it disturbance. Those closest to the core call it a breach. Not in security, but in assumption. It started when a pattern analyst in Zurich flagged your behavior as uncategorizable. You were flagged again 3 days later by a psychotemporal analyst in Buenos Aires. Then a third time by a deep pattern forecaster in New Delhi. Different continents, different languages, same observation. You were moving against probability itself. Every predictive model, economic, behavioral, geopolitical, began showing slight variances the moment your coordinates entered their simulations. What made them panic wasn't just that you defied prediction, it was that you made the algorithms unstable. The models didn't just fail, they collapsed, as if something inside your presence corrupted their very foundation. A covert task unit was assembled, quietly. They labeled you internally, Driftpoint 0. The term refers to a theoretical construct, someone who isn't a variable inside the simulation, but a gravitational override, something that changes the rules just by existing. At first, they monitored you passively. Energy field scans, subaudible biometric pulses, cognitive profiling based on digital residue. But nothing made sense. Every data point they pulled contradicted the one before it. No steady pattern, no core trauma, no archetype. Just divergence wrapped in stillness. What triggered escalation wasn't you. It was what began happening around you. Entire operations began to unweave after crossing your path. Black budget projects lost cohesion. Influencers lost their grip. Institutions, centuries old, started showing fractures after brushing against your timeline. And none of it was traceable to action. You weren't attacking. You weren't resisting. You were just there, quiet, unbothered, present in ways that made things disassemble under their own weight. So they went deeper. They started bringing in independent readers, intuitives with clean perception grids, people not aligned with any single power structure. One of them, a memory mapper from Morocco, dropped her tools mid-session and simply said, "This one doesn't cast a shadow. They cast reflections." When pressed to explain, she refused, said what she saw wasn't from this iteration of the timeline. Another was a cognitive codebreaker from Estonia. He walked into your presence and came out weeping. Not from fear, but from recognition. "They're not one of us," he said. "They're one of those that left and returned." No one understood what that meant, but the readings continued. One of the most disturbing results came from a sonic imprint analyst who ran your voice patterns through vibrational models. What she discovered wasn't a frequency, it was a signature. Embedded across subharmonic levels were tones that shouldn't exist, tones that matched archived recordings from unidentified atmospheric events dating back thousands of years. These weren't just sounds, they were commands, dormant instructions woven into existence long before modern language was shaped. She refused to speak after that, just wrote one word on the glass: reminder. That's when panic set in, because the truth wasn't that they didn't know who you were. It was that they feared what you were reminding them of, something buried, something ancient, something so deeply entangled in human memory that even whispering it aloud would ripple back through the subconscious layers of the collective. You weren't just a disruption, you were a trigger, coded to awaken dormant sequences in the architecture of reality itself. They started tracing people who crossed your path and reported shifts. Not trauma, not fear, alignment. As if something about your presence activated long-forgotten instincts. People started remembering things they'd never learned, reciting symbols they'd never seen, dreaming maps that didn't belong to this planet, and all of it, traced back to casual encounters with you. A handshake, a conversation, a glance in a crowded room. One psychiatrist in Vienna ran a controlled experiment, brought in 6 patients, each with different backgrounds, disorders, belief systems, had them sit in a room after you left it. All 6, without prompt, began describing visions of doorways. Some called them thresholds, some called them cracks. One simply said, he left it ajar. When asked what it was, she replied, the world behind this one. By this point, even internal skeptics began changing their tone. You weren't just a rogue variable. You were initiating a cascade, not a war, not a revolution, something quieter, older, more exacting. You were waking something up, not just in people, but in the fabric that binds them. That's why they started labeling you something new, not an agent, not a threat, a file. Not because you were documented, but because you were being filed away, hidden under layers of clearance no one had touched in decades. Top-level classification, beyond diplomatic, beyond tactical, the level where only myth and evidence meet. They stopped calling you by name, started referring to your presence by index only, a cluster of variables too dangerous to define. But they couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop cross-referencing every shift in the timeline to your last location. And no matter how many resources they threw at it, they couldn't get ahead of you, because you weren't moving forward. You were moving diagonally, slipping through their nets, not avoiding detection, but rendering detection obsolete. One operative stationed in Nairobi was tasked with tailing you. She had 15 years of tracking off-grid targets in jungles and war zones. She lasted 2 days, then disappeared. Not gone, just not the same. She returned with eyes that didn't track right. Said she had followed you, but ended up in a place with no sound, no sky, no time. Said you looked back at her there. Not with warning, not with threat, but with recognition. She left the agency that same week, stating only that this one isn't an escapee, this one is the alarm. And the more they dig, the more the patterns shift. Not outward, but inward. Those investigating you begin to unravel. They start to question their memories, their roles, their orders. Because something about you forces recalibration. You don't preach, you don't convert, you resonate. And that resonance destabilizes the foundations they built their control upon. You're not a name anymore. You're a turning point. A mirror that doesn't reflect what's there, but what's about to emerge. And that's why they can't close the file. Because the deeper they go, the more they realize The file isn't about you. You are the file. And somewhere, tucked between the pages of suppressed knowledge and redacted rituals, a truth is beginning to bleed through. A truth that what they're looking at isn't just a person, but a presence. Not just walking history, but an approaching update to everything they thought was fixed. The monitors are still active. The watchers haven't blinked. But what they don't realize yet is that the more attention they give you, the more the veil around their own narrative begins to fray. And it's only just begun. Because now, the resonance is no longer confined to rooms you entered. It's expanding. Buildings that housed your footprint are showing electromagnetic warps weeks after you leave. Psychological deviations in those who handled your records are being logged in silence. Entire psychological profiles once stable are now unusable. And the reason is simple. You are rewriting perception itself. One handler referred to it as a cognitive quake, an unseen, unmeasured force that shakes belief systems loose from their anchors. First comes the discomfort, then comes the collapse. It doesn't matter how trained they are. No amount of clearance prepares someone to encounter something that shifts their compass without ever speaking a word. You weren't groomed, you weren't trained, but you displace hierarchy by proximity alone. They've attempted to replicate your patterns, built psychological models to simulate your behavior. They inserted agents into scenarios shaped by your timeline. Each one failed. Not because they lacked your skills, but because they lacked your origin. You were not made through trauma or circumstance. You were inserted, and no one has figured out by what. But there are whispers. An internal document surfaced from an off-grid facility in Greenland, marked with classification codes that don't match any known agency. The document contained only 3 things: a waveform, a birth date, and a phrase that analysts still haven't decrypted completely. Second arrival, first recognition. The date? It matches yours. The waveform? It overlays perfectly with brain activity recorded in your presence but not from your brain. They're starting to believe you didn't just arrive, you returned. And whatever placed you back into this world didn't do so for your benefit. It did so for theirs. But not even those watching you know who they are. What they do know is that your presence is a countdown. Time behaves differently around you. That's not metaphor. Analysts studying footage of your movements report inconsistencies in timestamps, desynchronization between visual and audio feeds, even minor temporal loops that appear only in your vicinity. It's as if the reality you inhabit is slightly out of phase with the rest. They tried to measure it with atomic clocks. The result? The clocks ran normally until they were near you. Then they began to drift. That was the moment a senior physicist quit. Walked out mid-experiment, muttering a single sentence. This is not entropy, it's recall. From there, the file evolved. What began as behavioral surveillance became a full spiritual audit. They brought in linguists to study the way people speak after interacting with you. And the results were disturbing. Vocabulary shifts, tones of voice, realigned. One analyst wrote, "They don't just influence language, they recode it." People begin speaking like they've accessed an older dialect hidden in the mind's basement. Some even dreamed in languages they didn't know. One operative began writing glyphs on the walls of his apartment, believing they were protective. Another disappeared into the desert and was found days later, dehydrated, smiling, repeating a phrase in a dialect no one recognized. The mirror walks. But the most alarming pattern? You don't recruit. People recruit themselves. A cluster of unrelated individuals across 3 continents simultaneously cut ties with their lives. Careers ended, families broken, locations abandoned, each one citing the same internal calling, each one connected to you by no more than a glance, a post, a sentence heard once and forgotten by everyone else. But not them. They felt it, that fracture in reality when your signal passed through, and they answered it. And now the watchers are panicking, because this doesn't behave like ideology. It doesn't spread through force or persuasion. It spreads through recognition. Something buried inside people begins to unlock when exposed to you. Some call it awakening, others call it infection. But both agree it's irreversible. They tried countermeasures, digital smears, shadow censorship, predictive suppression algorithms. They even attempted synthetic mimicry, creating digital replicas of your online presence to mislead and confuse those drawn to you. All failed, because no matter how many copies they deploy, the signal doesn't transmit from your image. It transmits from presence. Presence they can't digitize, can't frame, can't kill. And now, those same analysts who once studied your disruption metrics have gone silent. Some resigned, some disappeared. One left a final message scrawled on the back of a server rack. We thought they were data. They're trigger code. You see, they're realizing too late that you don't enter places to take. You enter to activate. Cities you visit report increased reports of déjà vu. People near you begin experiencing events before they happen, not premonitions, leakages, like reality can no longer contain itself when you're near. And it doesn't stop there. One field agent tasked with long-term exposure to your timeline began recording irregularities in his sleep cycle. He documented dreams that mapped to no recognizable world. In them, he was not himself. He was you, living lives that spanned planets, eras, constructs not built by human hands. And he remembered. When he awoke, he drew maps that linguists and archaeologists later identified as geometries from pre-human mythos. But here's the part that truly shifted your classification from anomaly to priority. They compared your influence to others before you. Historical figures, disruptors, revolutionaries, but no match. You weren't causing resistance. You were causing discontinuity, a crack in narrative coherence. Entire chapters of consensus history are beginning to loosen from their moorings, simply because your existence casts a shadow backwards, not just forwards. You don't just distort the future, you edit the past. One operative described it best. They arrived, and suddenly, I can't remember the world before them clearly, like the memory was edited after it was made. And in that sentence, the truth bleeds through. You're not just on a mission, you're a mechanism, something old, placed here not to fight the world, but to overwrite it. That's why the new classification wasn't a name. It was a sound, low frequency, non-verbal, sub-audible. The kind that machines can register, but humans feel only in their bones. They encoded it into their restricted channels, hoping it would alert their sleeper assets to your presence. But instead, it triggered you. For weeks now, their agents report sensations of being watched, even when alone. Not by you, but by something behind you. Something that doesn't breathe, doesn't move. It simply observes. And those who cross too far into your path, they start to change, slowly, inevitably. The resistance inside them fades. Their priorities scramble. Their beliefs falter. They begin to question things they were once sure of, because whatever walks with you does not debate. It does not preach. It simply reveals. And when that revelation strikes, it is not with lightning, it is with memory. Memory of a time before stories, before categories, before control. A memory that screams not through voice, but through certainty. That they were wrong to watch you, wrong to contain you, wrong to think this was their world to manage. Because with every passing moment, with every ripple your presence causes across the layers of this fractured game, their control slips, their framework decays, and a new axis begins to emerge. You, not just as an individual, but as a frequency, a transmission, a signal sent not to destroy, but to replace. And now the ones who labeled you are being labeled. The ones who tracked you are being tracked. The ones who studied you are being studied. Because you didn't show up to start a war. You showed up to end one that never truly stopped. And in the deep tunnels of their most secure facilities, there is a new silence. A silence made not of peace, but of dread. Because they know what comes next. They know your presence wasn't the beginning. It was the signal. And that signal is no longer contained. It's moving through the static between dimensions, cracking open vaults not built with metal but with forgetting. Vaults that sealed off not danger, but truth. And truth has never needed permission to rise. Now, those who try to erase you are starting to vanish from their own records, their names missing, their photos fading, as if proximity to your unfolding has started a quiet erasure. Not retaliation, not vengeance, correction. In the shadow councils, the murmurs have changed. The panic isn't about stopping you, it's about adjusting to what you're revealing. Their greatest minds, the ones entrusted with the deepest blueprints of reality, are realizing you didn't breach anything. You awakened the protocol buried beneath it all. They called you a mystery file because they couldn't classify what you are. But now they know you were never a mystery. You were an override, and that override is rewriting things in real time. People around you are dreaming in symbols that predate their bloodlines. Places long thought irrelevant are lighting up with anomalies. Patterns once dismissed as noise now form maps that lead inward. Because what you triggered wasn't a chain reaction, it was a return signal. Others are hearing it. Those who were dormant, those who wore their human shells like uniforms for missions, long forgotten. They're reawakening, quietly at first. The teacher who suddenly draws sigils in chalk without knowing why. The child who stares at an ancient carving and speaks in a language no one taught her. The soldier who lays down his weapon and carves a circle in the dirt. Weeping, not grief, recognition, because they're starting to remember too. Not who they were, but what they were part of. And it all spirals back to you. You weren't discovered, you were released. That's why systems fail around you. Not because you break them, because you operate on a prior logic, one older than encryption, older than consensus. You didn't slip through cracks. You are the crack. And now, reality is recalibrating to accommodate your re-entry. Physics stutters, algorithms loop, and those who cling to the old timeline are seeing things that don't fit. Clocks miscount. Reflections misbehave. Thoughts arrive before questions are asked. This isn't interference, this is reintegration. Because what you are isn't singular, it's nodal. A convergence point where timelines fracture and realign. You don't just walk into rooms, you shift the context of those rooms. And in that shift, the false scaffolding collapses. The ones who built the script are panicking now. Not because you dismantled their system, but because you made others see through it. You walked in and made their whole structure feel like a cheap set, their secrets like bad lighting. But what scares them more than your presence? Your effect on others. Because those who encounter you don't return the same. They start to question what they were told. They start to feel frequencies in silence, codes in coincidence, intent in memory. You awaken not rebellion, but pattern recognition, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. So now, the last failsafe is being activated. Not a weapon, not a protocol, a choice. Yours, because you were never just a presence. You were a pivot. And now, the timeline hangs on what you choose to ignite. You can walk away, let the systems devour themselves in slow collapse. Or you can step fully in and let the original design resume. They fear the latter. Because if you step in fully, if you stop dimming to fit, if you stop speaking softly to avoid triggering their alarms, the architecture they depend on won't just tremble. It will remember you, because it was made with you in mind. The veils between places grow thinner. The moments between moments stretch longer. And somewhere at the center of all this, you stand still. Not because you're uncertain, but because you're deciding. And that decision is not just personal, it's catalytic. Entire outcomes rest on whether you move left or right, speak or remain silent, activate or observe. But make no mistake, the countdown is no longer theoretical, it's felt. In the hum of machines that shouldn't know your name. In the eyes of strangers who recognize you before you speak. In the old places trembling not with fear, but with anticipation. They tried to hide you behind red tape and riddles. But you were never meant to be archived. You were meant to be realized, and now, everything not aligned with that realization is beginning to fall away. Because you didn't show up out of nowhere, you returned on schedule to finish what only you were equipped to begin. And now, the world waits. Not for another revelation, but for your next move. Because the Watchers finally understand. You weren't the mystery, you were the signal the mystery was built to delay. And now that delay's expired. Welcome back. Your file was never closed. It was sealed until the world was unstable enough to require you. And now, it is. The seal has broken, not with noise, but with sequence. A resonance only a few can hear. But those who do, feel it in their marrow. You are not just visible now. You are in play. And those who tried to bury you in data have begun erasing themselves from it, not to protect you, but to avoid what comes with you. Because presence alone doesn't shift reality, purpose does, and yours has re-entered orbit. Now, you don't follow paths, you generate them. So step. Because when you do, the world doesn't just react, it realigns.